War zone, the Mideast, and chaos. Yasser Arafat still a prisoner, but not staying silent. Israel defying the UN. Next move. President Bush breaks his silence. What will the U.S. do now? England in mourning. The matriarch of Great Britain's royal family, the Queen Mother, has died at 101. And the smart money for tax time, what you need to know before April 15th.
This is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw, reporting tonight from Israel.
Good evening once again from Israel, where tonight there's been another suicide bombing as Israeli forces continue their military assault on the West Bank, including the compound of Yasser Arafat, who's been trapped there now for more than 36 hours. The Israelis are ignoring the UN Security Council resolution signed by the United States calling for them to withdraw. Today, President Bush got personally involved, speaking from his ranch in Crawford, Texas.
I think that Chairman Arafat can do a lot more. Truly believe that. I believe he needs to stand up and condemn in Arabic these attacks.
We begin here in Israel tonight at Ground Zero, Ramallah. Here's NBC's Dana Lewis.
Tom, there are reports tonight that Israeli forces are demanding that the several wanted men inside Yasser Arafat's compound surrender, and Palestinians fear that the army may even attempt to storm the building. Soldiers and tanks at every corner, in control of Ramallah and the compound of Yasser Arafat. Today we found Israeli tanks inside Arafat's headquarters, constantly prowling the grounds and what's left of the outer wall. We witness ambulances also trying to get into the compound and bring out some of the wounded from the last day of fighting. This ambulance attendant, ordered out at tank point, says Israel has been slow to allow anyone to help.
We've been trying to take the wounded out since last night.
Israel is now in command of every building but this one. Arafat is on the second floor in a dining room, say sources. Power was temporarily cut. Today, this candlelight interview smuggled out.
I am appealing to the whole international world to stop this aggression against our people. This military escalation, day by night, this killing.
This is as far as we can get to the compound. These tanks obviously warning us not to come any closer, but inside we're told that ambulance attendants today were able to take in food, bread, water, and some medical supplies. And one ambulance crew spent the night with Arafat and the 100 people with him. A New Yorker here with a volunteer Palestinian rights group. He was allowed to enter Arafat's headquarters last night, but got trapped by the fighting.
There were people sleeping on the stairwell, trying to get some sleep. Of course, the whole time all of this is going on, the tanks are shelling the building and are firing with their heavy machine guns. They'll shoot for probably 15, 20 minutes at a clip.
Shapiro says half the men inside are Arafat's bodyguards, preparing for a last stand if necessary. Israeli forces squeezing Arafat and Ramallah itself today. Hundreds of young men aged 15 to 45 rounded up, ordered to report to this school. Tonight, running gun battles between Palestinians and Israelis, who seem only to have begun the siege of Ramallah. And Palestinians are vowing to fight on. Tonight, there's been another terror attack 30 miles to the west of here in the heart of Tel Aviv. My colleague, NBC's Keith Miller, is on the scene.
I'm at the scene of the third suicide bombing in less than a week. And tonight, a radical Palestinian group with links to Yasser Arafat claimed responsibility for the bombing. The bomber, strapped with explosives, detonated at a coffee shop, killing himself and injuring more than 30 people. The explosion blew the roof off the cafe, shattered windows for a city block, and overturned sidewalk tables and chairs.
We're waiting for it to happen, because this is the situation now.
And there will be more?
I think so, yes.
Another deadly incident in a war that appears to be widening. The Israeli army today expanded its occupation of Palestinian towns. Early this morning, tanks and troops moved into Bet Jala, less than a mile from the biblical town of Bethlehem. Palestinian gunmen offered no resistance. And in Hebron, troops took up positions in the town center. Some Palestinians responded with Molotov cocktails, but most of the population remained indoors. The military sweep, according to the Israeli government, has just one aim: destroy terrorism.
We did it mainly because we had to fight against the terror that is killing Israelis almost every day.
Hostilities also erupted on Israel's northern border. Israel bombarded suspected Hezbollah positions in Lebanon after reportedly coming under fire from the radical Islamic group. The Israeli military action appears to be just beginning. Today, 10,000 reservists got the order to mobilize to join the fight. Still, Palestinian suicide bombers are on the offensive tonight, and every city and town in the country remains on high alert. The Tel Aviv police chief here, by the way, is warning the people that they should expect more attacks. Security officials are also saying that the entire country of Israel must be prepared for further bombings. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Keith Miller here in Israel tonight. There was some talk of a massive Arab demonstration today, but it never materialized. Hezbollah, the radical Islamic organization based in Lebanon, shelled the northern parts of Israel, but it didn't last very long. In the old city of Jerusalem today, a small band of protesters, including members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and Palestinian leaders, staged a low-key demonstration that was closely supervised by Israeli police and military forces at Jaffa Gate. I spoke with Sari Nusseibeh, a prominent Palestinian intellectual, a political moderate who is Arafat's commissioner for Jerusalem.
This is not a fight, I think, between Israelis and Palestinians. It is between us, Israelis and Palestinians, who want a just peace, and those who are against it.
Is it possible for these two men, representing these two sides, ever to find any common ground or compromise or a first step?
You know, 20 years ago, when Sharon went after Yasser Arafat in Lebanon, he thought he'd be able to get rid of him. And 20 years later, here he is, Yasser Arafat, living within 15 miles from where Sharon himself lives.
What do you say to those people who are looking in from the outside, who don't understand in any fashion the phenomenon now of the suicide bombing attacks, and say, well, Israel should have the right to in some way defend itself against that?
There are far more effective ways of curbing terrorist attacks. Certainly, waging a war against an entire people and its aspirations is not the way.
And what happens if the Israelis physically remove Chairman Arafat from where he is?
I think they will make the whole region explode. I don't think it's in their interest to do this. Unless, of course, Sharon's idea is to explode the whole region.
That was Sari Nusseibeh, Yasser Arafat's personal representative in Jerusalem. Nusseibeh and almost everyone else here agrees the only force with real influence here is the United States, Israel's closest friend and a longtime broker in this region. NBC's Nora O'Donnell tonight at the White House with the Bush quandary. Nora?
Good evening, Tom. Tonight, in an effort to put the diplomatic peace plan back on track, the president delivered a stern message. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat must do more to crack down on terrorism. Today in Crawford, Texas, the president broke his silence to publicly lay blame on Arafat for failing to stop the suicide bombings.
I think Mr. Arafat could have done more 3 weeks ago and can do more today.
The president refused to publicly ask Israel to pull back its tanks and troops from Palestinian cities, even though the U.S. backed a UN Security Council resolution today calling for such a withdrawal.
I can understand why the Israeli government takes the actions they take. Their country's under attack.
The president today phoned the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia to reaffirm his commitment to the peace process and to reiterate that U.S. Special Envoy Anthony Zinni will remain in the region to seek a ceasefire. Bush also singled out Iran for shipping arms and funding Palestinian extremists.
The Iranians must step up and stop sponsoring terrorism.
Tonight, even as Mr. Bush called for a peaceful solution, the president did not announce any new actions by his administration and said he has no plans to personally intervene. The president said, Arafat doesn't need a phone call from me. He just needs to do what I said. Tom.
Thanks, Nora. And while that was going on here in Italy, a terror alert for several Italian cities has authorities and travelers on edge this Easter weekend. We get the latest on that now from NBC's Pat Dawson.
For 3 young Americans in Italy, the talk of terror is like distant thunder, enough to make them wary, but not enough to keep them from their Easter holiday.
It was a little scary, but like at home, you can't let it bring you down. You can't stop your life for a threat.
The threat of an attack doesn't seem to have diminished the usual long lines of tourists in Italy this Easter weekend. At the Vatican, thousands passed through tight security to witness an ailing Pope John Paul celebrate Mass. Earlier this week, the U.S. Embassy warned 4 cities here, Florence, Verona, Milan, and Venice, could be targeted by terrorists. Though Italian officials have tried to downplay the threat, they increased security in many places. Today, police divers patrolled the waters of Venice. In Florence, checkpoints and new metal detectors outside the city's museums. Even here, amid the peace and stately beauty of Italy's churches, there is the specter of terrorism this weekend. The embassy's warning specifically says these terrorist groups don't distinguish between official targets and civilian ones, like restaurants, hotels, even places of worship. A point violently underscored by the bombing of a church in Pakistan 2 weeks ago that killed 5, including 2 Americans.
Let us help them profess their...
Still, at the Church of Santa Susanna, widely known as the American Parish in Rome, Father Greg Appercell says that for Americans who live abroad, caution is just part of the new reality.
I also think that their faith is important and that they feel that they don't want to be held hostage and have to stay in their homes and not be able to worship.
Well, I think all Americans have to really judge for themselves how much risk do they want to take. Today, perhaps nothing is safe. After all, the terrorists came here and carried out attacks in Washington and New York.
The risks of a dangerous world Americans are learning to live with. Pat Dawson, NBC News, Rome.
Still ahead tonight, my colleague John Siegenthaler in New York with more news, including the death of Britain's Queen Mother at the age of 101. I'll be back later in the broadcast from Israel with the story of the legacy of hate left behind the last time that Ariel Sharon and Yasser Arafat pushed each other to the brink.
Sunday, Out of Control, the latest on the war in the Middle East, plus the crisis in the Catholic Church, problems and solutions. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Ship and War, April 17th, only on NBC News.
Everyone here in the Middle East remembers what happened the last time Ariel Sharon and Yasser Arafat had this kind of a showdown. 20 years ago, Yasser Arafat was operating out of Lebanon when it was invaded by Israel, led by its defense minister, Ariel Sharon. What happened later was one of the most gruesome massacres in this region. It's remembered by 2 names, Sabra and Shatila. Here's NBC's Jim Masada.
Again today, thousands of Palestinian refugees across Lebanon venting their anger over Ariel Sharon's latest offensive and reminded of what once happened here in Sabra and Shatila, 2 refugee camps outside Beirut, and under the command of the man many Palestinians still call the Butcher of Beirut, Ariel Sharon.
He is considered as the main responsible for this massacre here in the Arab world.
September 1982, Israeli forces led by Sharon drive Yasser Arafat's PLO out of Beirut and are standing back as Lebanese Christian militiamen, Israel's allies, enter the 2 camps to flush out guerrillas.
The Israeli soldiers that were congregated here seem to be in a very relaxed mood, as if nothing were going on.
But inside Sabra and Shatila, hundreds of Palestinian civilians, including women and children, slaughtered. Mohammed Abu Radena was 6 years old when soldiers broke into his house in Shatila, forcing out 11 family members, including his father, at gunpoint.
They were brought here, and they started to shoot them.
Sharon, never formally charged, always blamed the Lebanese, claiming he knew nothing about the massacre. But Mohammed and a whole generation of Palestinians blame Sharon.
In the law, it's named command responsibility, which goes back to Sharon. So Sharon, he gave the order.
The memory of Sabra and Shatila is so strong that years later, Sharon's visit to Jerusalem's Temple Mount, held sacred by Muslims, triggered riots and led to the current cycle of violence. But Mohammed's fight is in the courts, one of 23 Shatila survivors who have filed a case for war crimes against Sharon in a Belgian court, the case still in its early stages.
We're trying to get justice, absolutely.
For many, Sabra and Shatila are living reminders that Sharon doesn't want peace.
And he tends to consider that these people are worth killing.
Today's Palestinian fighters more daring in part because the old enemy, Ariel Sharon, is back. The man who 20 years ago, Mohammed says, stole his life. Jim Maceda, NBC News, Sabra and Shatila.
That's nightly news for this Saturday night from Israel. And Easter weekend in the middle of Passover, and once again, the Holy Land is deep in war. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you Monday night from New York, if not before.